Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. In today's case, we bring you a chilling and twisted tale, one of betrayal, deception, and a deadly obsession. This is the story of the Manson family, Helter Skelter Unleashed. A tale of manipulation, delusion, and violent fanaticism. This case will leave you wondering, how could one man hold so much power over others, and why would they follow him to the brink of insanity? Stay with us as we unravel the dark and chaotic story of Charles Manson and the infamous Manson family. Charles Manson, Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, and Patricia Krenwinkel, four names that will forever be synonymous with terror, manipulation, and mindless violence. But what drove these seemingly ordinary people to commit unimaginable atrocities? Was it mere obedience to a delusional leader, or did something far darker lurk within their hearts? This is the twisted story of the Manson family and the murders that shocked the world, a tale of blind loyalty, chaos, and the destructive power of manipulation. Stay with us as we unravel the chilling events that led to one of the most notorious cults in history. Charles Manson's life began in turmoil, setting the stage for the dark path he would eventually walk. Born in 1934 to a 16-year-old single mother, Manson's early years were marked by neglect, instability, and brushes with the law. His formative years were spent in reform schools and prisons, where he developed a deep mistrust of society and an ability to manipulate those around him. By the time he emerged into the free world in the mid-1960s, Manson had transformed into a figure who could both charm and terrify. In Los Angeles, a city pulsing with the energy of countercultural revolution, Manson found fertile ground for his ambitions. The summer of love had swept through the nation, and young people flocked to California seeking peace, enlightenment, and rebellion against societal norms. Among them were vulnerable souls yearning for guidance, and Manson positioned himself as the answer to their restless search for meaning. He roamed the Haight-Ashbury district, strumming his guitar and preaching a mix of Eastern philosophy, apocalyptic warnings, and a strange reinterpretation of Christianity. He was magnetic, a man with piercing eyes and a disarming smile that belied the darkness within. He claimed to have insights others lacked, a key to unlocking a higher truth. Slowly but surely, he began to attract followers. Manson's family started small. Susan Atkins was one of the first to join, a young woman with a troubled past and a longing for belonging. Patricia Krenwinkel followed, drawn by Manson's promises of love and purpose. Over time, Leslie Van Houten and others were pulled into his orbit, each bringing their own vulnerabilities for Manson to exploit. He offered them an escape from a society they felt alienated from, creating an atmosphere where loyalty to him replaced their former lives and relationships. It wasn't just charisma that drew people to Manson. His years in prison had been an education in manipulation. He absorbed lessons from books like How to Win Friends and Influence People, and studied human behavior with a clinical precision. He used drugs like LSD to break down psychological barriers, creating an environment where his followers were pliable and open to suggestion. Manson crafted a narrative of spiritual awakening that cast him as both savior and prophet, convincing his followers that they were part of a divine mission. By 1968, Manson had relocated his growing family to Spahn Ranch, a dusty, abandoned movie set on the outskirts of Los Angeles. The ranch became their sanctuary, a world apart from the chaos of the city. Isolated from outside influence, Manson intensified his grip on his followers. Life at Spahn Ranch revolved around Manson's whims, his proclamations treated as sacred texts. He preached a distorted vision of love and freedom, but beneath the surface, fear and control reigned. Manson was no mere eccentric guru, he was a master manipulator. He carefully exploited the insecurities of his followers, convincing them that their old lives were meaningless. At the same time, he positioned himself as the only source of truth, a messianic figure whose vision of the future was absolute. His followers came to see him as infallible, their devotion growing stronger with each passing day. Despite the veneer of peace and community at Spahn Ranch, the atmosphere was charged with a sense of unease. Manson's paranoia and megalomania grew unchecked, and his teachings began to take on darker overtones. He spoke increasingly about a coming apocalypse, a racial war he called Helter Skelter. This prophecy, inspired by a distorted interpretation of the Beatles' White Album, became the centerpiece of his ideology. To outsiders, Manson was an odd but harmless figure, a relic of the free-spirited counterculture sweeping the nation. To those within his circle, he was a godlike figure whose word was law. But Manson's charm masked his true intentions. He wasn't building a commune, he was constructing an army. As Manson tightened his control, the boundaries of morality and decency blurred for his followers. Small transgressions like theft and vandalism became acts of devotion, proof of their loyalty. Manson justified their actions with grandiose speeches about the end of the world and their role in ushering in a new era. By the summer of 1969, the transformation was complete. The Manson family was no longer a group of lost souls seeking solace. They were a cult, deeply entrenched in Manson's apocalyptic vision and ready to do whatever he asked. Spawn Ranch, once a place of refuge, had become a breeding ground for violence and delusion. What drove Manson was not just a desire for power, but a deep-seated rage against a world that had rejected him. He saw himself as a genius, a visionary artist whose music would change the world. When his dreams of stardom were crushed most notably by record producer Terry Melcher, Manson's bitterness curdled into hatred. Unbeknownst to his followers, Manson was preparing them for something far darker than they could have imagined. His talk of love and enlightenment gave way to a chilling obsession with death and destruction. Spawn Ranch, with its dusty trails and abandoned buildings, seemed an ominous backdrop for what was to come. The seeds of tragedy had been sown, and the world would soon learn just how dangerous one man's delusions could become. As the Manson family's grip on reality slipped away, the line between devotion and madness blurred beyond recognition. The stage was set for a series of crimes so horrific they would shock the nation and redefine the meaning of evil. At Spawn Ranch, Charles Manson's influence over his followers deepened, and his teachings took on an increasingly sinister tone. The dusty, remote setting amplified the isolation of the group, creating an echo chamber where Manson's voice was the only one that mattered. The family had become a cult in every sense of the word, and their unwavering belief in Manson's apocalyptic visions was a testament to his mastery of manipulation. Manson's central prophecy, the one that consumed the group, was something he called Helter Skelter. This term, borrowed from the Beatles' White Album, represented the chaos he believed was destined to engulf the world. Manson convinced his followers that a race war was imminent, one that would see Black Americans rise up against the white establishment. He claimed they would overthrow the existing order, but, lacking the intelligence to govern themselves, would eventually turn to the Manson family to lead them. For Manson, Helter Skelter wasn't just a metaphor, it was a divine plan, one he believed was written in the music, the Bible, and the signs around him. To outsiders, these ideas might have seemed absurd, the ravings of a delusional man, but to his followers, Manson's prophecy was absolute truth. He spun his narrative with the confidence of a preacher and the allure of a poet, weaving in familiar cultural symbols and ideas to make it resonate. The Beatles became messengers of the apocalypse, their lyrics interpreted as coded instructions. The family was the chosen group, destined to survive the chaos and rebuild the world in Manson's image. He described a utopia, free of oppression and corruption, where they would reign supreme. Manson didn't just preach Helter Skelter, he prepared for it. Spawn Ranch became a training ground for survival. The family scavenged for food, stole cars, and stockpiled weapons, all under Manson's orders. They rehearsed scenarios of living off the land, imagining a future where they would retreat to an underground city in the California desert while the rest of the world burned. The ranch, once a peaceful haven for wayward souls, transformed into a militaristic camp brimming with paranoia and purpose. Manson's paranoia was infectious, and it became a tool he used to solidify his control. He told his followers that the outside world was full of threats, that the police, society, and even their own families were against them. The only safe place was within the family, and the only safe path was to follow him. This isolation further bound his followers to him, cutting them off from reason and dissent. Their entire existence revolved around his vision, and they began to see themselves as soldiers in a holy war. As the summer of 1969 progressed, Manson's frustration grew. He had spent years trying to gain recognition for his music, believing it was his ticket to fame and validation. His connection to celebrities and industry insiders, such as Beach Boys drummer Dennis Wilson, had briefly opened doors, but those doors quickly slammed shut. Rejection from record producer Terry Melcher was a particularly bitter blow, one that festered in Manson's mind as a symbol of the world's failure to see his greatness. This perceived betrayal became a turning point, fueling his descent into violence. Manson began to preach that the family couldn't wait for Helter Skelter to unfold naturally, they needed to accelerate it. He believed that a shocking act of violence, one that could be blamed on Black Americans, would ignite the race war. His followers, steeped in his teachings and eager to prove their loyalty, accepted this without question. They believed they were acting as instruments of fate, fulfilling a divine plan that would bring about the end of the old world and the dawn of a new one. At the ranch, Manson began planning the chaos he envisioned. He encouraged his followers to practice breaking into homes and writing cryptic messages on walls, leaving behind symbols that would sow confusion. They committed smaller crimes, such as car thefts and burglaries, to prepare for what Manson called the big mission. The family's sense of morality, already eroded, was completely replaced by Manson's warped ideology. Acts of violence and destruction became expressions of their faith, evidence of their readiness to bring about Helter Skelter. Manson's control over his followers was absolute. He used drugs to blur their perceptions, mixing psychedelics with his teachings to create vivid, shared hallucinations that reinforced his narratives. The ranch became a world unto itself, a place where reality bent to Manson's will. The family no longer questioned his words or his motives. They saw themselves as soldiers, bound to a leader who promised them salvation. By late July, the tension at Spawn Ranch was palpable. Manson spoke often of Helter Skelter as if it were just around the corner, an event poised to erupt at any moment. The family was restless, caught between fear and anticipation. Manson's frustration with the world's indifference to his music had boiled over into anger, and he was no longer content to wait. The time had come, he believed, to force the prophecy into motion. The ranch, with its dusty trails and abandoned buildings, seemed to hold its breath. Manson's visions grew darker, his sermons more urgent. He began to speak of blood as a necessary catalyst, a sacrifice that would awaken the world to its destiny. His followers, desperate to prove their devotion, hung on his every word. The family was ready to act, though they had little understanding of the full scope of what Manson had planned. They saw themselves as warriors, protectors of their leader's vision, and saviors of humanity. What none of them realized was just how far Manson's ambitions would push them, or how deeply their own lives would be destroyed in the process. The stage was set for the horrors to come, a chilling descent into violence that would shock the world. On the night of August 8, 1969, Charles Manson decided it was time to put his vision into motion. The tension at Spawn Ranch had been building for weeks, with his followers awaiting a signal, a command to act on the apocalyptic prophecy he had preached so fervently. The moment had arrived, and Manson's orders would set off a chain of events that would shock the nation and leave a permanent scar on its collective consciousness. Manson directed Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian to drive to a house on Cielo Drive in Los Angeles. The home had once belonged to Terry Melcher, the record producer who had dismissed Manson's music and crushed his dreams of stardom. Although Melcher no longer lived there, the house remained a symbol of rejection and betrayal in Manson's mind. He ordered his followers to kill everyone inside, leaving behind messages that would frame the murders as part of Helter Skelter's chaotic prophecy. As the four drove through the warm Los Angeles night, they carried with them knives, rope, and a revolver, all chosen with chilling precision. When they arrived at the secluded property, Tex Watson took charge, climbing a telephone pole to cut the lines and sever any connection the residents might have to the outside world. With the house now isolated, they began their approach. Inside the house, Sharon Tate, a rising Hollywood star, was enjoying an evening with friends. 8 months pregnant, Tate exuded the warmth and hope of someone eagerly anticipating motherhood. Her guests included hairstylist Jay Sebring, heiress Abigail Folger, and Polish writer Wojciech Frykowski. They were gathered for a quiet night, unaware of the horror creeping toward them. As the intruders entered the property, they encountered Stephen Parent, an 18-year-old visiting the caretaker in a guest house on the grounds. Parent, unsuspecting and terrified, was shot and killed by Watson. The first blood had been spilled, and the killers pressed forward without hesitation. Breaking into the main house, the group unleashed a scene of unimaginable violence. Tate, Sebring, Folger, and Frykowski were taken by surprise and overpowered. Watson took the lead, directing the others with brutal efficiency as they bound their victims and began the slaughter. The scene devolved into chaos, with the killers attacking their victims indiscriminately, driven by Manson's teachings and their own blind devotion. The violence was as methodical as it was frenzied. Sebring was shot and stabbed repeatedly. Frykowski, attempting to fight back, was bludgeoned with a gun and stabbed dozens of times. Folger tried to flee but was chased down and killed on the lawn. Tate, pleading for the life of her unborn child, was stabbed 16 times. The house, once a haven of luxury and promise, became a blood-soaked symbol of despair. Before leaving, the killers followed Manson's orders to write messages in blood on the walls. Susan Atkins scrawled the word PG near the front door, a chilling nod to the anti-establishment rhetoric Manson had infused into his teachings. The killers left the scene, abandoning the house to its silence and carnage, and returned to Spawn Ranch as if nothing had happened. The next night, Manson decided to escalate his campaign of terror. Dissatisfied with the chaos at Shoal Drive, he wanted to ensure that the next murders were even more impactful. This time, he chose the home of Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, a wealthy couple who lived in Los Feliz. Manson himself accompanied the group to the scene, although he did not participate directly in the killings. Entering the LaBianca home, Manson tied up the couple and reassured them that they wouldn't be harmed, a deception to keep them compliant. Once they were subdued, he left, instructing Tex Watson, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten to carry out the murders. Watson killed Leno LaBianca with a knife, carving the word war into his stomach, while Krenwinkel and Van Houten attacked Rosemary with equal savagery. Like the night before, the killers left behind messages meant to instill fear and confusion. Phrases like "rise and death to pigs" were smeared on the walls in the victim's blood. These words, cryptic and grotesque, were intended to incite the racial war Manson had prophesied. By the time the killers returned to Spawn Ranch, the city of Los Angeles gripped by fear. The brutality of the murders and the randomness of the targets left the public and law enforcement baffled. The crimes seemed disconnected, their motives incomprehensible, and the lack of suspects deepened the mystery. Within the family, the murders were seen as a triumph. Manson's followers believed they were fulfilling their purpose, bringing Helter Skelter closer to reality. But the cost of their devotion was immeasurable. The blood on their hands, both literal and symbolic, marked the beginning of the end for the Manson family. Unbeknownst to them, the web of secrecy was already beginning to unravel. Investigators were piecing together the clues, and whispers of the family's involvement were circulating. The trail of carnage would soon lead back to Spawn Ranch, and the dark fantasy Manson had woven around his followers would collapse under the weight of its own horrors. The aftermath of the murders on Cielo Drive and at the LaBianca residence left Los Angeles in a state of shock and terror. The brutality and apparent randomness of the killings created widespread panic, and the police were under immense pressure to solve the case. Investigators initially struggled to connect the dots, as the motives and methods seemed incomprehensible. What they didn't yet realize was that the key to unraveling the mystery lay within the strange and insular world of the Manson family. At Spawn Ranch, life continued as though nothing had changed. The family members, emboldened by the violence, felt they were part of something larger than themselves. They believed they had struck the first blow in a war that would bring about the apocalypse Manson had predicted. The murders were a chilling validation of their leader's influence, and any doubts they might have once harbored were now buried beneath their devotion. Manson, however, was not as confident as his followers. He knew that the authorities would eventually come looking, and his paranoia grew with each passing day. Spawn Ranch became a fortress of secrecy, with Manson issuing strict orders to maintain silence about the killings. He continued to manipulate his followers, reassuring them that their actions were justified and necessary. To distract them, he encouraged more minor crimes, including theft and vandalism, reinforcing the idea that they were soldiers in a greater cause. Despite Manson's attempts to maintain control, cracks in the family's unity began to show. Living in isolation and under constant pressure, some members started to question the path they were on. The gruesome memories of the murders lingered, haunting even the most loyal among them. For some, the reality of what they had done clashed with the idealized vision of the future Manson had promised. Meanwhile, the investigation into the murders was gaining momentum. Initially, law enforcement struggled to find connections between the two crime scenes. The killings appeared random, with no clear link between the victims. However, forensic evidence and witness accounts began to provide crucial leads. At the Cielo Drive scene, investigators found fingerprints and a bloody handprint. At the La Bianca home, the bizarre messages scrawled in blood hinted at a motive rooted in ideology rather than personal vendetta. The turning point came not from the police but from a series of coincidences and mistakes within the family. In October 1969, Spahn Ranch was raided by police on suspicion of auto theft, a crime unrelated to the murders. Although Manson and several followers were arrested, they were soon released due to a clerical error. However, the raid marked the beginning of the end for the family's secrecy. Following the raid, the family moved to Barker Ranch, a remote location in Death Valley. The harsh desert conditions and increasing tension within the group added to the strain. It was here, far from the chaos of Los Angeles, that law enforcement would finally catch up with them. The break in the case came when Susan Atkins, one of Manson's most loyal followers, began to talk. Arrested on unrelated charges, Atkins confided in a fellow inmate about her role in the murders. She spoke with disturbing pride about the violence, revealing details that had not been made public. Her confessions reached the ears of the authorities, who quickly realized they had stumbled upon the key to solving the case. As investigators pieced together the information, the web of connections between the family and the murders became clear. The bizarre ideology of Helter Skelter, the obsession with sparking a race war, and Manson's iron grip over his followers all painted a picture of a cult driven by delusion and violence. The seemingly random killings were anything, but they were part of a calculated plan orchestrated by a man who had manipulated his followers into carrying out his apocalyptic vision. In late 1969, the police launched a coordinated effort to apprehend Manson and his followers. Barker Ranch was raided, and Manson was found hiding in a small cabinet, a fitting image of a man whose delusions of grandeur had led him to this moment. His followers were arrested alongside him, their loyalty unwavering even as the evidence mounted against them. The arrests sent shockwaves through the nation. The image of the family young, seemingly ordinary people capable of such horrific violence challenged perceptions of innocence and the counterculture movement. The public struggled to reconcile the idyllic image of free love and peace with the brutal reality of the Manson murders. As the police began to interrogate the family members, the full scope of Manson's control became evident. His followers spoke of him with reverence, describing him as a prophet and savior. They detailed the twisted teachings that had led them to commit murder in his name, painting a picture of a man who had weaponized their vulnerabilities and turned them into instruments of destruction. But not everyone remained loyal. Under the weight of the evidence and the relentless questioning by authorities, cracks began to form. Some members started to distance themselves from Manson, offering insights into his methods and motivations in exchange for leniency. These revelations provided prosecutors with the ammunition they needed to build their case. The stage was set for one of the most infamous trials in American history. The world would soon learn the depths of Charles Manson's influence, the horrors of his ideology, and the devastating consequences of blind devotion. The family, once bound together by promises of love and salvation, was now fractured, their shared delusions shattered by the harsh light of reality. But even as the case against him grew stronger, Manson showed no signs of remorse, his chilling charisma and unwavering belief in his vision casting a shadow over the proceedings to come. The trial of Charles Manson and his followers began in the summer of 1970, capturing the attention of a nation horrified by the brutal murders and mesmerized by the twisted cult behind them. It was not merely a legal proceeding, it became a spectacle, a dark window into the dangers of manipulation, blind loyalty, and the power of a deranged leader. The courtroom itself became a battleground of ideologies, with Manson and his followers using every opportunity to project their defiance, even as the weight of evidence mounted against them. Prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi presented a chilling case, detailing how Manson had orchestrated the murders to incite a race war he called Helter Skelter. Bugliosi meticulously explained Manson's ideology, linking it to the bizarre and cryptic messages left at the crime scenes. He demonstrated how Manson's influence had turned ordinary young people into killers, bound by fear, devotion, and a belief in his apocalyptic vision. Witness testimonies painted a grim picture of life within the Manson family, describing a world where Manson's word was law, dissent was punished, and violence was a necessary step toward salvation. The courtroom atmosphere was tense, with Manson constantly attempting to disrupt the proceedings. He carved an X into his forehead, later altering it into a swastika, a macabre symbol of his rejection of societal norms. His followers mimicked his actions, shaving their heads and carving matching marks into their foreheads. Outside the courthouse, other members of the family gathered, singing songs, holding vigils, and proclaiming their loyalty to Manson. Their presence served as a chilling reminder of the power he still held over those who remained faithful to him. Among the most shocking moments of the trial was the testimony of Susan Atkins. Initially, her confession to a fellow inmate had been the linchpin in breaking the case, but in court she recanted, claiming her statements had been coerced. Her shifting narrative underscored the depth of Manson's psychological grip on his followers. Patricia Krenwinkel and Leslie Van Houten, two other key defendants, displayed similar signs of devotion, their demeanor alternating between defiance and blank detachment as they listened to the horrifying accounts of their crimes. Linda Kasabian, who had been present during the murders but did not participate, became a critical witness for the prosecution. Her testimony provided a detailed, first-hand account of the events, shedding light on the chaos and brutality of the nights in question. Unlike the other defendants, Kasabian expressed remorse, her cooperation with the authorities driven by a desire to atone for the role she had played in enabling the violence. Manson's defense team attempted to argue that he had no direct involvement in the murders, portraying him as a scapegoat for the actions of his followers. They emphasized that he had not been present at the crime scenes, framing him as a victim of a society eager to vilify the counterculture. But the prosecution dismantled this argument, demonstrating how Manson's influence was the driving force behind the killings. The family members had acted on his orders, believing they were fulfilling a divine prophecy. Throughout the trial, Manson's behavior was erratic and theatrical. He often stared down witnesses, attempted to intimidate the jury, and made outbursts designed to disrupt the proceedings. At one point, he even lunged at the judge, a moment that underscored the volatile and dangerous nature of the man on trial. His antics, rather than swaying the jury, reinforced the prosecution's depiction of him as a manipulative and malevolent figure. After months of testimony, the jury reached a verdict. Charles Manson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten were found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Tex Watson, tried separately, received the same verdict. The sentences handed down were the harshest possible: death. Manson and his followers showed no visible remorse as the sentences were read, with some even smiling, their loyalty to their leader unbroken despite the weight of their crimes. The trial's conclusion did little to quell the public's fascination with the case. Manson became a symbol of evil, his name synonymous with the dangers of unchecked charisma and the fragility of human morality. His followers, once ordinary individuals, became a cautionary tale of how easily people can be drawn into darkness when they seek purpose and belonging. The family disintegrated in the wake of the convictions, with some members renouncing Manson and others continuing to proclaim his innocence. In 1972, California abolished the death penalty, commuting Manson's and his followers' sentences to life imprisonment. This decision sparked outrage among the victims' families and the public, who felt justice had been denied. For the rest of their lives, Manson and his accomplices remained in prison, a grim reminder of the havoc they had wrought. Manson himself continued to court attention, granting interviews and attempting to spread his ideology from behind bars. His ability to command attention, even in incarceration, was a testament to the disturbing charisma that had drawn so many to him. Yet he would die in prison in 2017, his name forever tied to one of the most infamous chapters in American history. The legacy of the Manson family endures as a haunting example of how manipulation and delusion can lead to devastating consequences. The lives lost at Cielo Drive and the La Bianca home remain a stark reminder of the horrors inflicted in pursuit of a twisted vision. For those who survived, the pain and trauma lingered, a shadow that could never fully be escaped. Helter Skelter may have been Manson's fantasy, but its devastating impact on the real world is a tragedy that continues to resonate, a cautionary tale etched into the annals of true crime. Thank you for joining us on this harrowing journey into the mind of a manipulative madman and the followers who unleashed chaos in his name. If you found this story as haunting as we did, please like, comment, and subscribe for more gripping tales from the shadows of true crime. This has been Mystery Minds, where we uncover the darkest truths. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember the truth is often stranger than fiction.